We were just talking yesterday how the benefits of COVID, we're all at home, and yes, we probably have kids with snow days if you have kids in school, but we're able to participate here, which is terrific. I want to first thank our sponsors. We have some just terrific supporters of our talent efforts. That includes Signity Technologies, Bentley Systems, Boomi, and SEI. We have a terrific panel here this morning. And before I get to it, I first want to recognize and welcome two new members of the PACT team. Just in the past 2 weeks, we had two new folks start. Heidi Franklin joins us to help lead programs and events, and Chris Kantz joins us to lead marketing. You'll get the chance to spend a little bit of time with them in after the program once we're at tables. But welcome, Chris. Welcome, Heidi. In terms of the program, this is a webcast. If you have not been in Remo before, all attendees are muted with no video. You have a Q&A window. You'll see that on the right side of your screen. Use that to ask questions. You can also use the chat feature to chat among everyone or with specific individuals, but please use the Q&A window to post questions. You can post questions throughout the conversation, and our panelists will make sure that they take those. This morning we have two 30-minute segments, and at approximately 9:40, we'll jump back into the rooms where you'll have the opportunity for informal face-to-face networking. Now, without further ado, let me introduce Managing Director from Exude, Dan Gallagher. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks so much, Dean. Great to be here. Really,
it's great to have you. And maybe turn up the volume a little bit on your computer just so that we can hear you in your introduction. Again, thanks for your leadership here this morning. Super.
Is that coming through louder there?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. An hour. We get an hour of our time together. Thank you for investing in yourself. A couple of years ago, I was a participant of Leadership Philadelphia. And at the end of the program, for those of you that participated in that program, which is an amazing program, we had an opportunity to do a pay it forward project. And we were taking children of incarcerated parents to the circus. And our number one goal in that exercise was to actually finish with the same number of kids that we started with, right? It was this amazing exercise with our junto. And there we were, walking up the steps of then the spectrum and going up into the event with the students. And one of the students said to me, "Hey, mister, can I have a piggyback ride?" At that point, I had two sons, I now have four. And as we're walking up the stairs and he says that to me, I said, "Sure, jump on." And he said, "You know what? My dad used to give me piggyback rides before he went to jail." And I paused for a moment and thought of the power of his statement. And it didn't really hit me then, but it hit me now more in life. That life is full of opportunities to give piggyback rides and to get piggyback rides. And that young man taught me that. And I remember him very vividly on days like today where we're investing an hour. An hour won't change the world. An hour won't necessarily make rain happen or in this case, snow happen. But an hour does give us an opportunity to share piggyback rides on what's working for us and what else we could learn from each other. So our hope is that this hour with you serves as that piggyback ride, and that you're able to pay it forward with the others that you work with or colleagues that you even have outside of your firm. Today we're going to talk about inclusive leadership moments, and you would start by saying, okay, well, wait, what's the difference between a traditional leadership moment and an inclusive leadership moment? And I would explain it very simply as the difference sits between the verticalness of it and the horizontalness. And many of you that have been involved in product development know these terms in terms of market segmentation. But if you think about it in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the vertical aspect of what we're talking about is narrowly focusing on that topic, right? Of what is diversity versus inclusion, what is equity versus equality, et cetera, et cetera. What is unconscious bias? When you take the opportunity to reposition your lens and look at all leadership moments as inclusive leadership moments, now you're in the horizontal place. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, is the horizontal leadership moments. These are moments where you can take an everyday moment of being a leader, and all of us have the opportunity to be a leader regardless of what the title is on our email signature. to create moments where you can be more inclusive, where you can be more equitable. And we're really excited to have the time together. So at this point, I'm going to ask our first set of panelists, Iris and Zach, to join on the screen. And they should be popping up. Here we go. Wonderful. And so, Iris, we're going to start with you. First, thank you so much for your time and your sharing your experiences today. What I wanted to do is just give you an opportunity really to introduce yourself and allow you to, we're going to reference back and forth, and I'll throw it in the chat as you're introducing yourself, 6 leadership moments that we've highlighted. There's way, way, way more than 6, but maybe as you do your introduction, if you can share a little bit about which moment is meaningful to you right now.
Sure. Thanks, Dan, for that beautiful story and the nice introduction. And hi, everybody. It's really great to be with you all on this snowy morning. My name is Iris Melendez. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm calling today from the west side of Philadelphia, where it's definitely coming down pretty hard. So I'm glad to not have to go anywhere. I am the Vice President of Talent Management, Diversity, and Inclusion for an organization called Solenis. And, but really, I think my journey with inclusion has been lifelong. Having, just thinking about the way I grew up and my professional career and the leader that that I always am trying to develop into. The moment, Dan, that really stands out for me of the 6 that you've asked us to think about today is the hiring moments. Hiring, there's no more important decision than hiring somebody into your team or into your organization. And it's worth investing the time. If you're a business leader or an HR professional, it's worth investing the time, making sure that you're really doing that in the most thoughtful way possible. And we have a lot of automatic ways in which we do things, in which we make decisions, and hiring is one of them. And so it's worthwhile to sort of take a pause and slow down that automatic thinking and that automatic behavior to say, all right, how can I make this really important decision in a more thoughtful and inclusive way? And I think whenever we are making big decisions or we need advice, we have something important that we need to do, we tend to go to the usual suspects, right? The same go-to people that I have in my little inner circle. I trust them, I rely on them. We've known each other for a long time. I know that they can help me get things done. But that, this is human nature, all of our inner circles are probably made up of people who look like us, think like us, and act like us. So I challenge all of us to slow down the automaticity of our hiring decisions and to really stop and ask, how can I cast a wider net in my hiring? How can I reach out into different talent pools? Maybe my automatic reflex is that I just post the job on LinkedIn or I have the same recruiter that I go to all the time. But how can I do that differently to draw in people that are different? Because that's, being intentional and taking the time, slowing down, doing that in a really intentional way is how you're going to get a different result. I know we have people on the call who may be in big companies, and we have other people on the call who may be entrepreneurs or work in a small startup. Those of you that are lucky enough to have a recruiter that's doing the recruiting and the hiring for you, you can expect that recruiter. In fact, you can demand that recruiter to go and tap into different talent pools for you. You can demand that, and that they build a diverse slate of candidates when you're hiring for every single job. You can ask them to reach out into communities on your behalf. It doesn't necessarily take more time. What it takes is intentionality. The fear is that my hiring is going to be slower. It's going to take me a longer time to find the right person. That's not been my experience. It just takes intentionality to expect that of the people that are supporting you in your recruiting process, if you're lucky enough to have that. Now, also in many cases, you might be your own recruiter, right? You might be the one that's out there having to fill your own jobs. And, you know, and for those of you that are in that situation, it's even more important to sort of slow yourself down, because your social network is probably made up of people that look like you. I know my social network is made up of married, heterosexual, cisgendered people with kids, because that's who I am. So that's my network. So if I really want to hire different types of people, I have to go beyond that. So beyond the usual suspects. So I challenge all of us, slow down, take an audit of who's in your circle, who are the people that you always go to when you have an important decision to make, and how can you draw in more difference, you know, different types of perspectives, people who are going to challenge you to think differently and to hire differently. And it's a really, you know, kind of critical practice. The last thing I'll say, Dan, because I know I'm babbling now, you know, when you draw difference towards you, right, and you're pulling in people who are different than you, then you really have to listen to those folks, right? You have to get really good and practice asking questions and allowing them to disagree with you, allowing them to say what they really think, to be who they really are, creating that psychological safety for people to tell you. If you've hired somebody because they're different and you have them now on your team, then you have to make it safe for them to be who they are and to tell you what they really think, even when they disagree.
Mm-hmm.
So how you ask questions, you know, questions like, you know, is there a reason why we shouldn't do this? What am I not thinking about? Please help me play devil's advocate here, so that it's encouraging people to be honest with you and tell you, share their different perspectives, because that's why you hired them after all, right?
Yeah, great point. I have a couple of follow-up questions, especially around your use of the word intentionality. I think we can dive into that, and I'm going to throw into chat as we introduce Zach. We're looking for your feedback on which of the 6 moments, or you can throw in a 7th or 8th a moment that you'd like to hear the panel talk about specifically in the first half of this segment. So I just hit chat on that. And you should be able to see that. But Zach, welcome again. Thank you as well for your time, your perspective. Really great to reconnect with you as well.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much. So I'm Zach Wilcha. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm Executive Director of the Independence Business Alliance, and that's the LGBTQ+ Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, where we provide opportunities, access, and resources to our LGBTQ+ owned businesses and employees, and our visible allies as well. So the things that I'll convey in this discussion on my end will be primarily through the LGBTQ+ lens, but I think that they can be generally applied to DEI matters as a whole, because I think that there are clear and basic strategies to keeping employees feeling safe and valued. So I wanted to talk about engagement moments, because what excites me about that is that it's authentic investment in people driving towards equity. And, you know, when people ask the difference between diversity, inclusion, and equity, I always say that diversity is who you bring to the party, inclusion is asking those folks to dance when they get there, and equity is letting them choose the music and the food and help you prepare everything from the beginning. That's my big party analogy for that. So there are so many engagement moments where you can make sure that you're investing in the folks that you work with. I think a point is that knowing that company policies are the minimum expectations, and you have to understand the formal mechanics of the law versus what the workplace practice actually looks like. So if you can have clear and robust policies as a starting point, then you're able to expand from there and make people feel included in every part of the workplace. One way to do that is to establish employee affinity groups, or ERGs, employee resource groups, as voluntarily employee-led groups designed to foster a diverse, inclusive workplace by identifying some key values within communities and putting organizational goals into action. Many of our largest companies in the Philadelphia area have LGBTQ+ ERGs. There are some for folks of racial and ethnic backgrounds. There are some for folks who are female identified, veterans, folks with different abilities. And if you think that your business is too small for affinity groups, then one good practice is joining with some other similarly situated businesses and combining together so that folks have compadres at other organizations that they're able to share best practices with. I think it's also important to be constantly promoting the benefits of diversity. And if you need to do that with your managers by letting them know that folks are going to be more productive, just better workers when they can be authentic, that's one way to do it. But it's one of the rare business moments where the moral good and the business good sort of intersect together. And I think that that's pretty powerful. I think the inclusive leadership in company culture always begins at the top with folks who are visible, loud, and confident in their support.
Right.
So if you're going to have these employee resource groups, we need allies to step into those groups and be loud and confident and visible, talking about how important they are. And to that end, we need to make allies visible in workplaces as well. One way to do it, Iris and I both introduced ourselves with our preferred pronouns. That's a great way for cisgender folks to signal that you're allies to trans folks in the workplace. You also need to know that ally is a verb and it's a title given out to others after earning it. So if you're going to call yourself an ally, you should be working very closely with the folks that you say that you're allied to. And you should also talk about what consequences are when folks like LGBTQ plus folks or other marginalized communities are met with adverse actions in the workplace, and figure out what those consequences are and make those notable to everybody in the workplace. And finally, I would say you need to engage with the community more than once a year. Pride Month is fantastic in June, but I promise that I am just as gay in February as I am in June. And I know that folks feel the same way. My friends at the African American Chamber are busy as elves are in December during February, during Black History Month, when everybody wants to engage with them for 1 month of the year. So I think it's important that we think about ways that we're engaging with all of these communities all year long, and not just when it's obvious or not just when there are crises. Crises are a great way to show support for communities, but it shouldn't end when the crisis is over. So taking time to learn and to educate others and tackling regressive views head on, I think lets you become more of an accomplice than an ally. And that's really what the goal is at the end of the day.
Drop the mic. Thank you, Zach. Really great and way to connect it to Iris's point. We had a planned question as we kind of think through some of the responses in the chat here. But I want to connect one thing, Zach, that you said to one thing that Iris said, and see if we can start with the dialogue around this. Zach, you used the word authenticity, and I want to connect that to the intentionality that Iris put on the table, and really ask whether the moment is around, for Zach, the moment for you was around engagement, for Iris, the moment for you was around hiring. As you look at your individual authenticity, more so than your organizational values, your individual authenticity, and you link it to your intentionality, how important is it for you to center first on the why? Like, why are you standing in to your point, Zach, in month A as much as you are in month B, which is the popular month to stand up for this underrepresented group? So center me on the why here. Like what like, how do in those moments, Iris, where you're saying like, pause, think about it before you journey through the hiring process, or go ahead, Iris.
Yeah, I mean, I think values and purpose ground everything, whether you are the leader of an organization, if you are an entrepreneur, a founder, that's trying to build a business, centering how you build that business on what is our purpose, why do we exist in the world, and why are we trying to make the world better, then helps you guide all of your actions, your reorganization, how you design your benefits programs. All of those decisions go back to the purpose. And I think all of us, I know it's labeled as a younger generation thing, but really all of us want to have purpose in what we're doing, and we want to get up because of something bigger than ourselves. So I'm passionate and excited to go in an organization that has a purpose, and where I know what is this company trying to achieve through the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy? How are we trying to make the world a better place? Right? Always is grounded on purpose and values that's set by the leaders and the tone of the organization.
Yeah,
And I
I
think
think.
the why.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was going to
You're
say,
good.
I think the why is also a two-pronged thing that intersect. And I hinted at this when we were talking, but there's the business case for the why, right? That you want everybody who shows up in your workplace to feel like they can be their authentic selves, so they can do the best kind of work. You want your customer base to be able to see that you're providing that, those values in your company are going to, reflect who you want to be interacting with outside the company as well. But there's also the sort of moral imperative behind it as well, that runs parallel to and intersects with the business case.
Yeah.
And, not to repeat everything that Iris said, but, why are you even doing this if you can't from the outset state what your values are and then build your company around a reflection of those?
Totally agree. I mean, to me, that's the difference between are you all in or dipping your toe in, right? And is your commitment for that 1 month of the year or holistically? But that's a self-exploration exercise of the why, right? You're going to have an organizational position, and maybe you're that person that's helping to define that organizational position. But it really starts with your inner drive, right? In terms of how much of your personal passion. And I think as we listen and navigate through the discussion today, both panels. I would encourage those in thinking about their piggyback ride to think about the individual piggyback ride of what they are reflecting on for themselves, and also the organizational piggyback ride, right? There may be things that one may generate momentum for the other and vice versa, but it's thinking about them separately, right? We are all people first and employees second, and mixing up those orders can really mix up your values. Let me pause there.
Yeah.
I think
human beings, not human doings.
Yeah, the
Right.
organizational piggyback ride, I feel like needs to be more of a conga line, I guess, if we're going to stretch out this metaphor, because to Iris's point before, that's the perfect opportunity to expand your circle and expand your comfort zone on what you're thinking, right? You know exactly what your inner drive is. You have the chance to self-reflect on that. But that's the point where you need to bring in other voices to really make sure that your organization is reflecting everybody.
Right. And so let's go back to your moments here. So from a hiring moment, Iris, talk maybe about the difference of engaging that more inclusive perspective before you write the job description versus I'm down to 3 finalists and 2 finalists look like me and 1 doesn't, right? What's the difference?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that goes into when you write a job description, you can automatically be leaving out lots and lots of portions of the population, right? If you say in a job description, I need 20 years of experience or 15 years of experience in XYZ, well, think to yourself, who was graduating from universities 20 years ago? Who's going to be able to meet that criteria? Well, it's probably people who look a certain way. So you need to surround yourself with people who are going to challenge you right from the beginning in how you spec out a job description to be as open and inclusive that's going to attract as many people as possible to your role. And if it doesn't, right, if you find yourself, well, I just don't have diversity in my applicant pool, and you really have to ask yourself why. And you have to, take a long and hard look. What is it about this job? How have I written this? What is it about my organization that's not attracting different types of people to it? And you have to have some really honest, difficult conversations with yourself if you're not even attracting the candidates. But I think our challenge as hiring people is to cast a wide net, attract diverse candidates, diverse pools and slates of candidates into your organization, interview as diversely and broadly as possible. From there, you hire the best person for the job, right? But if you're not even attracting and considering diverse candidates, you're never going to hire for diversity. So it's really about attracting them as applicants, doing the outreach, bringing them in, and then letting the process flow from there.
Got it. Super. Zach, same question for you in terms of, the difference between when you think about engagement experiences, and there's so many folks that are chasing almost a status or a number of, 80x% of our employees are engaged, right? the difference between looking at it on the front end as you build policy and practice and systems versus, you know, the back end after you do an employee opinion survey or get feedback through an open door policy.
Yes, certainly starting from the beginning with policies that are, you know, open and inclusive of a bunch of people is great, but I don't think that we should discount the importance of, you know, having the latter of what you said from the former.
Yeah.
You may be bringing in who are different to the company all the time, and getting their input is going to help you expand what engagement you have to offer to folks. And I also want to say, like, how important it is to connect engagement to hiring, because, you know, folks who are looking for jobs more than ever are able to examine the kind of engagement that you have with the communities that they belong to in the companies. So as this interview is going back and forth between employer and employee, they're able to see if you have ERGs in your company. They're able to see if you have inclusive gender language in your benefit package. They're looking to see if, you know, there are ways for allies to be supporting them when they get there. Are there mentor programs specifically based around different communities that are going to help people move up in pipelines, which is another moment that you mentioned. So, you know, there's a ton of ways to look at this, and there's no right starting point, I don't think, but I think you need to be doing the work on the front end and by gathering the input from the folks who are going to help make your company better.
Yeah, agree, totally. I think that is spot on. Let's pivot. A couple of the chats came in with a desire to talk a little bit about pipeline, and it ties both to engagement and the hiring. Right. Strong leaders are balancing how they listen, not only to their client or customer or community base, but also to their employee base, to your point, Zach. And that's then influencing their thinking about what talent they move into where. So I'll toss to either of you here comments in terms of, I know it was a top priority for both of you as we prep for this, thoughts around pipeline moments.
You're not going to have a diverse pipeline if you're not doing diverse hiring. So that's, you know, that's kind of the starting point. But I think if you're lucky enough to have a workforce that's representative of the community, then, you know, we have to recognize that organizational systems are built to promote sameness. You know, they just are. How many times have you heard the phrase, well, this person just doesn't fit in, or that person doesn't, you know, culturally fit in here. So we promote sameness all the time. And I'm going to use that word intentionality again, because we can have programs, you know, ERGs, we can have leadership development programs, we can have all sorts of programs in the company that are trying to combat that. But in terms of developing a more diverse pipeline, it takes intentionality for those people in your organization who are leaders and mentors to find different types of talent in the organization and to take them on as proteges. Again, we are attracted to sameness. So we have an affinity to people who are like us. So if I'm in an organization, I'm going to be attracted to other Hispanic females because that's my nature. That's who I am. But actually what I should be doing as a leader in an organization is finding somebody who's different than me and taking them on as a protege and developing them, because I have to intentionally counteract my automatic tendencies and preferences. That's how we'll develop difference in the organization.
Yeah. Zach, any thoughts in terms of your experiences and or those of your membership that are growing their businesses?
Yeah, everything that Iris just said. I think it's really important that, you know, even starting simply and thinking, if you're going to an event, can I invite somebody who's different from me to the event with me? Can I bring somebody who is not like me to the meeting? I don't, you know, like what Iris said, I think it's deeply important that Iris continues mentorship of folks within her community, but there's ways you can do both at the same time. ERGs, if you're lucky to have them, are going to feature foster leaders and boosting employee engagement, giving voices to specific communities. Mentorship programs are important. And like we said, you folks that you're mentoring or vice versa. I think you always have to be cognizant of tokenizing. You know, there's a study done about if you have a meeting and you think that you are diversifying just by bringing one or two folks from a different community onto a panel or a meeting. Those folks are going to feel the pressure to agree with each other and not come up with their own thoughts at the meeting. They're going to be afraid to share them. So you have to diversify beyond more than just one or two people. I think that you also have to recognize diversity within groups to create a pipeline. The LGBTQ+ community is not a monolith. Hispanic, female identified folks are not a monolith. There are lots of different diversity of thought and class and et cetera, within all of these groups. So, you know, thinking about diversity, it's a little bit like 3D chess. It's not necessarily just like moving one piece on the board and being successful. And, you know, creating task forces around different communities that include HR folks, DEI experts, strategy managers, and employees that are representative of the protective class that you're trying to empower, I think can be really powerful within workplaces when you're creating pipelines for success.
Yeah. Agree. And Zach, I'll go back to the story that I kicked off with. There was intentionality of sharing that story. When we've talked about mentoring now here a couple of times in the last few minutes, right? One of the more popular trends, if you will, and I think one of the more valuable spaces to become a more inclusive leader is to be in a reverse mentoring relationship. And I use the word reverse intentionally because historically there's been a thinking of mentors have more experience, more power, more positional power, like et cetera, right? And there are more leaders today that are stepping into a space of saying, I know what I know and I know what I don't know. And I can learn from others that are different than me and stepping into a relationship, a mentoring relationship that goes against the norms, right? And I don't know if I see, you know, kind of the verbal responses or the nonverbal responses. Anything you want to add there as we kind of wrap up this piece here?
I have a mentor friend of mine who prides himself on being a secret mentor to folks just so he can learn from other folks. So they never like formalize a mentorship, you know, but he believes that he's a secret mentor to a bunch of people and he's taken people on as secret mentors to him. That's pretty powerful too.
I could not agree more, Zach. I hate mentoring programs. I know that's not a popular thing to say. Mentoring is incredibly meaningful and powerful to people in their lives. Completely agree with that. But mentoring programs are pretty terrible. I think anyone can be a mentor to anyone, and it does not have to be this formal, lifelong, you know, up on a pedestal type of relationship, you know, and it's up to, I think, mentors to find proteges. Mentors have to find proteges who are the same as and different than them. Because we all have a lot to learn. You know, I'm sad that I'm at the age and stage in my career that I have more wisdom to share. I used to be the protege, now I'm the mentor. But we could be doing that at any point, right? Just sharing. That's all it is. It's just about sharing and caring, you know, about a person that's different than you.
Love it. Iris and Zach, thank you so much here. We're going to transition to thank you. We're going to transition to the second part and time permitting, bring you back in on the back end. But let's bring in Sabrina as we kind of go to the thinking around inclusive benefits, and very similar to how we framed leadership moments versus inclusive leadership moments. When you think about inclusive benefits, Sabrina, you and I've had this conversation before. You know, the benefits are the traditional aspects of what have always been offered in benefit plans, right? You've got time off, you've got comp packages, you've got days off, you've got all these different aspects of 401ks. You know, there's financial, there's time, there's medical. We're gonna really create this difference between the vertical and the horizontal discussion again here, Sabrina, right? And I'd love to get your thinking on what you're seeing play out in the marketplace around inclusive benefits.
Great. Thanks, Dan. Good morning, everyone. One of the things that I discussed with Carla as we prep for this is something that people don't even think about and as a benefit, and that's closing the disparity in the wealth gap. So more and more organizations are moving to automatically enrolling their employees in retirement plans. So when you think about it, the data shows that the average individual here in the US is not saving enough to retire, right? So they're hanging around longer in organizations. So it catches it at the beginning, at the end. What it does at the beginning is it automatically enrolls individuals They, of course, have the option of opting out. So it's not a dictatorship that says you must do this, but it does show them the value of compounded interest over time, as well as noting the fact that a minimum investment pre-tax dollars has nominal impact on your take-home pay, which a lot of people may say, look, after taxes, I can't save anything. So at the front, again, it captures the new employees starting with the organization by automatically enrolling them in. And then when I say it also captures it on the back end, because now you've got employees who are up in age, ready to retire, thought they couldn't, and they looked at and they find out they have money saved, right? So it also allows you, and I don't mean to imply push out older employees, but to continue to bring other employees in, because maybe that employee who is more seasoned, that is hanging around longer than they had anticipated, has now moved on, and you've created other opportunities within the organization. Because we do know that many of our younger employees coming into organizations are saying, hey, I can't advance in an organization. There's no place for me to go, because the more senior folks are staying longer, so they're moving on. So there's a cross dynamic where everybody's moving in and out according to their individual need.
Love it, love it. I know another one that you and I have talked about, because we both worked at universities in our backgrounds, is around reimbursements, tuition reimbursement programs. Can you talk more about that? Exactly.
So traditional programs have tuition reimbursement oftentimes for the employee and sometimes for the children. But what if you don't have children? What if you're an individual who doesn't? So you can take advantage of it yourself. So maybe if in those organizations, if they just set a pot, that reimbursement for tuition is for this amount of money. And then the employee can use it as they see fit. So It may allow them to get a full degree. It may pay for part of an advanced degree. But again, it meets the employee where they are, instead of saying, we value those employees only who have children because we provide tuition reimbursement for them.
Right. The other piece I'm seeing is more organizations going to pre-reimbursement, right? So when you look at the startup costs to get into the reimbursement cycle, right, there's a check you have to write to a university that gets you into the space where you can have reimbursement back in, right? If organizations would change their practice and create a pre-reimbursement, right? Clearly there's a little bit of a different model there and a different risk, if you will, if you're from the employer perspective, but it's an investment, right? You're making an investment in the employee, their education, their productivity, their careers as well.
And it doesn't have to be for the full amount of a full semester, but enrolling, paying for books, paying lab fees, if those things are included, can be daunting. So if you say we will pay for 1 or 2 classes up front, then what that does is it gives the employee the money to get started. And then when they get reimbursed for future classes, they just continue their cycle on. Opposed to, I can't even get a down payment, if you will, to allow me to start.
Right. The last one I wanted to ask you about, Sabrina, is really around PTO and holidays.
Yes.
Right. In your experience from not only your previous roles in DEI leadership, but also in working with clients, where are you seeing organizations step up differently now?
So more organizations are going to a pot of time off. So PTO, that's not what it stands for, but pot of time off is a good acronym. What it does is it acknowledges that people have different things that are important to them and when they want to take that time off. So someone might say, well, yeah, but then you have vacation for that. But let's talk about religious differences and cultural differences. So if I'm a Jehovah's Witness and I don't celebrate Christmas, and now the whole organization shuts down on Christmas, there's no acknowledgement that that is not of relevance to me. So and I've got to take my vacation days to be off on a day that's important to me by saying, okay, we may shut down at Christmas, but we're also giving this pot of time off that an individual can use without having to disclose why they're taking time off. I couple that with the addition of Juneteenth this past year in 2020, where individuals finally came to understand the significance of Juneteenth, and then also acknowledge that July 4th does not have the same importance for everyone throughout the country, and certainly not for African Americans. So to say Juneteenth is the day that we either will acknowledge as an organization, or again, allow you to take off at your discretion opens it up for everyone.
Yeah, I know our firm, for example, gave everyone off for election day, and I was working with actually a global retailer that did the same thing. And so there's more statements that you can make. Again, part of this is matching what you're externally messaging to your clients, customers, and community with what you're offering to your employees, right?
Correct. And employees or potential employees are looking at that as they come into an organization. What are you saying to me with your inclusive benefits? Going back to what Zach and Iris talked about, we are talking about ERGs. We're talking about language on applications. We're talking about mentorship programs. I call those the more tangible things, but the more intangible things are the other unspoken things.
Love it, Sabrina. We are going to bring, you just mentioned inclusive benefits. Let's bring in our friend Greg and let's talk a little bit more in detail around inclusive benefits. So, you know, Greg, you've heard the conversation going on here today. When you think about inclusive health benefits, what are you seeing in the industry right now that organizations are stepping up to?
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. So I think when we look at inclusive benefits, we're looking at that as the lens in which we look at strategizing on employee benefits, right? We see our role as advisors, as a consultant, to assess the gap, right? And there's no doubt there are some emerging trends, whether if it's perks, policies, or actual benefits, right? And how do we as consultants help narrow that gap or eliminate that gap of that inclusive lens? So when we look at, focusing on the medical benefits, right? That's a really key component to navigating the healthcare space. Certain insurance carriers, right, will exclude services or restrict access. How are they handling certain screenings, treatments, domestic partnerships? Right, you have to look at your document called a summary benefits and coverage, right? This is this long laundry list of insurance jargon, but it's so important, right? This SBC will tell you what the costs are, what the exclusions are, if it applies to deductible, in and out of networks, right? So our team at Exude, we have a client care representative that'll help employees navigate this because it is really cumbersome to understand, okay, right, when you're in the throes of needing a service, what is actually covered, right?
Right.
Another key component is fertility benefits, right? We just saw the state of New York basically mandate that inclusive family planning, mandating that larger group insurance coverage, IVF fertilization, right? So you're going to start seeing more and more either states mandate this or insurance carriers. But again, looking at how you as the employer, what ability do you have to tweak some of these benefits, right? It typically does come down with size, geographic region, what are some of the state regulations, right? But understanding what are your current, I would say, opportunities to be inclusive, right? As you look at some of those benefits.
Yeah.
Another key component, I'll just mention a couple more, is transgender, right? Make sure you're covering preventative care, testings, procedures, medication as it relates to transitions. Again, this goes back to what does the employer have the ability to tweak or change, and what is going to be standardized by the carrier, right? We know that once you get over a certain size, right, you do have the ability to look at adding some of these benefits, but there's a cost component to this, right? And I think that's a big piece of this is that, okay, what are we, our benefits need to reflect our culture and budget, right? Make sure we're not sacrificing being inclusive, right, throughout the strategy.
Right. So let's talk about that for a second, right? Because I think there's purpose and there's individual values, and then there's the discussion that it hits the organizational budget discussion.
Yeah.
Right. There's no greater investment than a company has. 99 times out of 100 for most organizations, the number one spend they have is people, right? Comp and benefits. So what are organizations doing to be productive, to be thoughtful, to be inclusive, and to be smart with how they make these investments?
Yeah, and no doubt it has to reflect, again, benefits have to reflect culture and budget. And I think the biggest component is understanding you have a pulse of the people you serve, right? So surveying your employees, no longer the days, this paternal instinct of an employer and saying, I know what's best for my employees. Here are the benefits, you choose. So I think that first and foremost, you have to get a pulse of what makes sense for your population and knowing what your culture is and kind of marrying the two. The other piece is looking at the funding, right? So obviously in the medical insurance component, there's two different ways to finance your healthcare. Are you fully insured, right, where you're paying a premium every month to the health insurance company, or you look at maybe alternative funding or even self-funding, right? So we're seeing more and more employers look at self-funding their healthcare benefits, right? Even though it's down to 35 and 40 employees, and we have a consortium we work with in a safe environment, but that gives you a ton amount of flexibility, right? Now you can change your plan designs, you can move benefits where deductibles and copays, you can offer zero cost, right, benefits for some medications, for generic drugs, for preventative care visits, right? I mean, you can really start to customize this as long as it meets ERISA guidelines, but really, really important to look at the financing piece. Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll mention is, when you look at the strategy is, this defined contribution is becoming more and more popular, which means I'm going to give employees, X amount of dollars to spend on benefits, right? Here's $400 a month, right? You know what you need as you and your family or yourself, right? To navigate your healthcare journey or your employee benefits journey. What does that look like? Is it things like mental health services, adoption benefits, some social benefits like child and elder care, right? How are you customizing your individual benefits journey and path? And what's the employer's role in this? So we're definitely seeing this defined contribution amount and saying, here's the dollars, you go choose, right? Our role is to help, really give you or the ability to choose and select what type of benefits make sense for you. Also, the other component we've seen some success is it's called voluntary or contributory benefits, right? There are some perks and really benefits that you're able to partner with third parties to supply these benefits to your employees at no cost to the employer, right? The business is saying, look, now all of a sudden I have an audience of 100 people who might select this benefit. I'm going to give you this reduced rate, right? Yeah. And so again, it's this perks, benefits, policy, right? Understanding how do we create this inclusive environment, right? With all three of these kind of resources and perspective, and it's going to continue to evolve. Where we were in this space 10, 15 years ago to even 3 years ago, I mean, even a year ago with the pandemic, how are we, giving this environment of being inclusive?
Yeah, and I think, Greg, what you just shared ties back to, even what Iris and Zach and Sabrina were talking to. And a lot of this is about listening to the communities you work with and the communities that you serve, right? So, you can start with your own intention, your own purpose, right? But in the end, if you don't have inclusive practices, it's going to, Glassdoor, for example, enacted a diversity rating now on their employer reviews. And I think that's great to build in, visibility and transparency into that approach. But that's what employees are doing amidst their homework right now as they interview and sit there and say, do I want to work for this company? Okay, what does that leader stand for? And what does their organization stand for? And they will work through a checklist of how do they invest in the community? How do they invest in their team members? And if the investment is leaned more towards customers than employees and tentative or prospective employees are starting to call that out, right? And sit there and say, hey, they're better to their customers than they are to their employees. Absolutely.
Dan, there's chat going on about the need for community service days and beyond Martin Luther King Day.
Love it.
Another inclusive benefit. So there's need all year long. And many organizations shut down and all employees go on MLK Day and do community service. Well, what about the other days throughout the year?
Right.
About offering a once a quarter or once a month opportunity for employees to band together if they want to as a as a group activity or as an individual. It could be any 501c3 organization that I have an interest in to go and support. So I worked for an organization that if you were a full-time employee, you got up to 40 hours every 18 months to go and do community service. And if you were part-time, you got up to 20 hours. And that grew out of this organization doing mission service work in healthcare and going across, to other countries. But there's need right here in the United States. So when the new CEO came in, he said, first of all, let's look at organizations that are in alignment with our industry. And then let's look at how can we get employees partnered with right here in the community and allowing them to go on whatever day that they see fit. So I actually was responsible for every month scheduling an initiative for someone to be involved in. And employees really engaged in it.
Yeah, and back to Zach's point, this is where you can build long-lasting relationships and not once-a-year moments to jump in and out. Let's use this moment, Greg and Sabrina, actually, to also bring in Carla and talk a little bit about, amidst all that the world is going through right now, and candidly, all that our city is going through right now in Philadelphia. We thought it'd be valuable to take a focus on well-being. So Carla, welcome to the discussion.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me.
So you've been listening as well. Obviously, the focus here is, I'd love to get your thoughts on how this all creates kind of this well-being, this employee experience that is focused on being able to be your best self and psychological safety.
Yes. So if there's anything that the pandemic has really amplified and prioritized in workplaces, is this demand and need for prioritizing employee well-being, and in particular, mental health. Right. So that's really what I've been seeing. Our organizations reaching out to us. How can we support our staff with regards to topics of mental health, and connected to mental health, and really interconnected to that is the psychological safety. Right. Feeling like you can bring your whole self to the workplace. And most folks are more comfortable sharing physical illnesses and information about pains and aches than having anxiety, for example, right, or specific stressors. So that in itself is a problem, and the data reflects this. 1 in 5 Americans have a mental illness, right, and that's from a diagnosed lens, right. When you think about those folks who are in shame about it, or feel unsafe to even reach out for support. So given the year we've lived through, I am interested in seeing what the updated data would show, which I would assume is going to be more concerning, right? So
I know you shared with me, and Carla, if you can drop it in, you were going to share it in the chat, an HBR article this morning, and I would encourage any participants that are on this that have a go-to article or a thought leader they're following. This is about creating a community here of momentum, to go ahead and share who you're following, or the article or website or podcast that you're listening to. But I think that I'd love to create more of a connection here, Carla and Greg, in terms of what you're seeing around what's becoming more employee or sponsored activity around mental well-being versus what prior might have just been an individual exercise that somebody had to go, and even Sabrina, from your experience in working in healthcare.
Yeah, now I can start with just what we've been having conversations, and Greg, I know you have had a lot of conversations with your groups around mental health services, like the employee assistance programs, behavioral health services. I mean, it's it's the point where we have clients that are asking for additional services, more concierge type services. Yep. That provides access to a diverse range of therapists, for example, or 24/7 access, immediate access. So you think about those who might be in crisis. So when we think about any kind of programming, especially from a mental health and employee well-being lens, right, we want to think about the spectrum of where folks are, right, in terms of their mental well-being. So there are those, and many are in the crisis phase. There are some employees that are actually thriving, right? Given what we've lived through, they're actually doing fairly well, right? So we want to be mindful that, offering any kind of programs, whether it's the EAPs or resilience programs, so life skills programs, all of those really do support total mental health. And, folks can go from thriving to now, downward spiraling, right? In a matter of days or moments based on a trauma or an experience. So I think it's, when you're dealing with humans, it's really, I keep this in mind all the time. Anyone who's dealing with any human being is dealing with trauma, right? And so we want to be mindful. How can we, really prioritize empathy, compassion? And I think I have time to share a quick story. I did a training yesterday. I don't know if I shared this with you, Dan. We haven't had a chance to connect yet, but it was so interesting. It was a mental health training for a group of leaders. And I did a poll in the beginning. I launched a poll, and it was rating themselves on in terms of their confidence and competence level, and being able to have a discussion with colleagues around mental health, right? Basically checking in with them, making sure they're okay, and having the confidence that they can actually support them. And 90% of that group said, I don't feel comfortable at all, right? I have zero confidence. And what was interesting about that training as well is that I started sharing symptoms of anxiety, of depression, of common mental health disorders in the workplace. And the stigmas came out, and that, leaders were it was so courageous of them to be vulnerable to share that, during these Zoom meetings they've had with staff, they didn't realize that some of the symptoms that I was sharing may have actually been, related to anxiety or depression. Right. They judged them as being aloof, being lazy, right? Being disconnected. And right. So that's a big problem, right? So I think that's it's the elephant in the room. It's a bigger and most least discussed topic around stigma in the workplace, and how can we be more inclusive in that? It's a lot to address, but I think it needs to be a top priority in order for those EAP programs, behavioral health services, to be more utilized and inviting for folks to use, right, and get support.
Yeah, and maybe
go ahead.
Just one thing I would add, just from a resource perspective, right? So just talking about the EAP programs, right? Typically they are really underutilized, right? So it's, who's going to take that call from an insurance carrier, right? And be able to, really feel comfortable to dive in. And then what if you have one visit and then you have, goes into a roundtable, you have a new person and you're talking to. So, I really think it is important. We've seen more and more employers look at an HRA model where, it's a reimbursement model, right? Or again, having a dollar amount that they can use towards mental health, covering co-pays, deductibles, right? And so just to get back, that's why the financing piece is so important. You have to understand where the dollar is being spent in employee benefits. And maybe, we can change a plan design here, we can do this, and now I can spend, we have a client that literally was just kicking in dollars this year because we knew that it was the number one issue that their employers are coming to was with mental health support. And the insurance carrier, again, they do a fantastic job most part, but they needed additional resources to supplement, to delete the barrier, right? And that's the inclusive part that's so important.
Yeah, and there's the organizational part that you speak to, Greg, and then Gina, I see your chat, and great to have you on, around what can the individual leader do in a team meeting or a one-on-one conversation. Gina shared an example of the green, yellow, red. We just did a team meeting yesterday where we did breakout groups, small groups of 4 or 5 people, and we talk about the good and the bad that's going on. We're all socially distanced and virtual, and talking about the bad was healthy for people, right? So that they know that they had community support from their teammates, and things that people may not have known of what was. So it's not always, it's balancing that optimism with meeting people where they're at, right? I wanted to see if we can bring back in Iris and Zach as we kind of start to get into our closing thoughts here, and maybe get them to chime back in as well. But I'm loving the discussion on how we're balancing what individuals, and Zach, you brought this up earlier, around what individuals can step up and do on an ongoing basis versus organizationally. So I'd love maybe Iris and Zach, for having listened to the middle segment here, as you kind of think about wrapping things up. Any closing thoughts that you'd want to add in here?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Since I see I hit my unmute button faster than Zach did, so I'll go. I go back to the comment that I made at the beginning about the usual suspects. When companies make these decisions and design these programs, they tend to have a default employee in mind, whether consciously or unconsciously. And so, who is that? What is that? What is your default employee? And could you actually, broaden that and think about different types of employees that have different needs that you may not have even thought about before, and just ask them? Ask, expand your circle of your go-to people and the go-to automatic reactions that you have for how you make all these decisions and design all of these things. And just expand it, pull in, be intentional about drawing in people that are going to help you think differently.
Nice. Thanks, Iris. Zach?
Yeah, I'm just really struck by how holistically everything fits together. That actions how each of the 6 buckets that you mentioned are so interconnected with one another. And the mental wellness piece really struck me when Carla was talking about that as well. We hear from businesses all the time that, they just don't know necessarily how to deal with that. They were unequipped before this year. And we're always saying that this year didn't really change anything, but it did reveal so much about what was not being done in the workplace. So, I think it's really exciting to talk about all these things together and think about what we can do moving forward.
Yeah, I'm with you. Look, all of these things combined make up our employee experience, and our employee experiences are what drive any organization, right? In terms of, how productive is your day going to be today versus yesterday versus tomorrow? And look, this journey called work is a marathon, not a sprint. So it's not about, bonking after day one. It's about pacing ourselves and running the whole race. And so I think it is important to, Zach, step back and look at this holistically and sit there and say all these factors influence us, and the gift that we have of being leaders is a gift that influences all of our colleagues every day when they go home or to the next room and have dinner with whomever they have dinner with. We all know, even before COVID, that loneliness was one of the greatest challenges within our society. And the last year has only added to that. And so building community and having the courage to introduce conversations is really, really important to us. And so as we think about wrapping this up, I'm going to drop into chat one of my favorite, and I hope this comes through. There's a great video out there called The Declaration of Interdependence. And it's got a social civic edge to it, but it's a great video that you can use at a team meeting. It's 4 minutes long, and I think this starts with all of us having the courage to do something different. And so as you think about the rest of your week and even going into next week, I want you to really center on one moment that you can really dig into your why and let that propel. It didn't come through. I'll do it when I'm not talking. Sorry, I'm multitasking. But I'll give you one quick example. We was involved in one of these types of sessions about a year or two ago, and a colleague of mine was involved, and we were working together on this. And out of the session, they shared that they went to a meeting the next day and had the courage to go into a group meeting where they were one of the more junior tenured folks and suggest that the language that was being used for these communications did not have inclusive pronouns, and that it was an opportunity to shift. And he influenced that organization to shift. Had a huge impact across all that we're seeing and reading. That as they were digesting that information, they felt like they belong. So there's different moments like that. So I'm going to pause and first thank.
Can I? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
You're good, Sabrina.
Can I just reiterate the importance of what Iris said? If we don't take away anything else, but it's the importance of intentionality. These things seem easy. They seem like, oh, it'll happen organically, but they don't. We've got to be intentional about whatever it is that we're doing. And when you think about hiring from a diverse candidate slate, if you only have one of whatever that is, one woman, one African-American, one LGBTQ individual on your candidate slate, the probability is low that they're going to get the job when you've got a whole pool of maybe 6 candidates. So if you intentionally do it, you're going to, more than one individual is going to show up on the slate. And if the organization that's working with you doesn't bring you more than one, they're like, we could only find one African-American woman. Well, you know what? Go back and find me more, because they're out there. And then you build that possibility of being able to select, because 1 or 2, as I put in the chat, doesn't create diversity. It's just it's just the first step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Dan, I see that there's a question that someone posted about small companies and making policies in small companies that I'd just like to maybe very quickly address. I think if you're in an organization of 5 or 10 people, I think behavior is probably a lot more important than policy. Because you could certainly take the time to formalize and put something in writing, but what you do is going to stand out more and be way more visible than what you say on paper.
And I would add to that, I love your perspective there, Iris, and I would add to it that it's also what you don't do.
Yeah.
Right. Like that a non-action is an action, and you know, we're all being counted on to step up in those moments. Great discussion. Love the perspective. Really, really appreciate everyone's time and insights. I wish you joy in shoveling out today, and wish the rest of you that participated in this. Thank you for the chats. Dean, I think we're going to toss it back over, or is it Danielle, back to you?
You are tossing it back to me. Just for a quick thank you to everyone on our panel. This was such a great discussion, such a robust discussion in the chat. So I remind you that this Remo room, the floor will be open until 10 a.m. So you can pop over to tables, talk amongst yourselves, go meet our panelists and ask them follow-up questions, and just keep the conversation going. So thanks again to our sponsors, Signity, Bentley Systems, Boomi, and SEI for sponsoring our Talent Connect Roundtable. We'll do another 1 or 2 of these between now and June on various topics related to talent and workforce. So please check back. We'll also have the recording of this session available on our YouTube channel a little bit later. So please share if you found anything of interest. But appreciate everyone's time this morning and hope to see you all in the room. Thanks so much.